First and foremost, again, I just want to say welcome to everyone who is joining us today. Again, my name is Dominique Hollins. I am beyond excited to have what has been a tough conversation for many of you in the workplace. And so I'll tell a little bit about me and help usher us through this discussion through today to take away some of the pain and the discomfort that typically comes through this discussion. And we have a lot of folks to help us do that. So not only am I a proud hone coach, because I love the theory behind how we are teaching people how to think and lead as managers in the workplace, but I come from a business operations background. So I'm really looking at how these learnings can be integrated into the fabric of an organization in order to achieve the profitability that is the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion. I founded some organizations that further that mission, one of which is We360, where I coach organizations from startups through Fortune 500s on what is the right way to do that, from your board of directors all the way down to individual contributors. So that's really the driving force for my work. My previous experiences both with Google and eBay, looking at how digital infrastructure is not as equitable as it could be and working with underrepresented communities, and then some accolades that come with that. But really the personal driver for this work is professional and personal growth through human connection. And it's not just for me, it's for everyone in this room and the recipient of all the wonderful work that you all have been doing throughout your lifetime and will continue to do that. The image that you see here is the young woman that I do this work for. She represents the generations to come, and there were those who came before me. And so my purpose in this work is to make sure she does not experience the barriers that I have and others like me on this journey. What I'm hoping to achieve with you today is to remember why we are here. This is a continuation of a discussion we had a couple of weeks ago titled Combating Racism. And because of you and your engagement and your willingness to have this conversation, we were able to elevate the Black Lives Matter movement and the challenges that has existed not only throughout our nation's history, but is exacerbated by this time. George Floyd's senseless murder contributed to the elevation of this voice, and it's not only a movement in the US, but globally. So I don't want you to forget that even though it's not in the media as it was a month ago, that this movement continues to happen, and that George Floyd, unfortunately, with his case, has elevated this discussion in a way we wish it had not have at the sake of his life. And an extension of that is Breonna Taylor. While we talk about George Floyd and others who have suffered at the hands of police brutality, this young woman at 26 years old was murdered in her sleep by I'll allow you all to read the story, but again, justice is pending. And if she were a different person, maybe it would not be. So really quickly, I want to hand it over to Karen to work with us to acknowledge Breonna Taylor and the lack of justice in her name. You're on mute.
We would like to take a 26-second moment of silence in recognition of 26 years of Breonna Taylor's life that were robbed from us by the Louisville Police Department. And the fact that her mom, Tamika Palmer, and Louisville activists have been out on the streets for 146 days appealing for justice for her. And that their calls are going unanswered. And it's just so important that we say her name and that we keep the name of Breonna Taylor going. So let's I'll count it out on my phone. We'll take a 26-second moment of silence. Say her name, Breonna Taylor.
Thank you, Karen. This is one of the hearts of the reason that have brought us here today, and I hope that you would do some more research if this is new to you so you could hear her story and be active in a mission to seek justice with us. In order to continue these conversations, the house agreements for today is to be present Although the urge to multitask might be very present for many of you, multitasking actually doesn't exist, and it reduces productivity by 40% according to research. So just join and be with us today as much as you can. Actively participate. The questions you ask could help to inform and educate others. Put your questions in the chat box. Sam is doing an excellent job of looking at your questions to see when it would be a great time for us to get some of those in with our panelists. And remember that this is a safe space. If nowhere else to have this dialogue, this is the place where you all would like to be. So I want you all to keep that in mind today. And then now the people of honor for this moment. I could not do this conversation justice without having partners on this journey to help frame the narrative and really to give you some of their insights as they each individually practice this work with other organizations. I am so proud to be here. All of these are, for those who I just met, are becoming friends, and many of them have been friends from quite a long time, and we are partners in this work. So in the order of the images shown here, starting with Alexandria Butler, if you could tell our community today who you are, what do you do, and what to learn from you today. Alexandria, kick it up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandria. Everyone calls me Lexi B, so feel free to do so. My day job, I'm a senior program manager at Twitter, running all of our privacy and regulatory initiatives from a program management standpoint. I am also the founder of Sister Circle Black Women in Tech, which is a 6,700 plus community founded in 2017 for Black women in the tech industry. Really a safe space for Black women to come together and have crucial conversations about what it means with our identity, as well as what it means to work in the tech industry. I'm also the founder of Unfiltered by Lexi B, which is a platform on Instagram that really helps young professionals understand the tips and the tricks and all of the mistakes that many of us made so they don't have to make them again, on really how to live their best life, figure out themselves, and therefore use that same practice in their professional journey. I hope that all of you really learn from this is to really have an introspection of your privilege, because everyone who is here today has layers of privilege. Many of us lack layers of privilege, but we all do have layers of privilege. And I hope that after today, you really take honor and note of that and start using those layers in your freedom fight to help people who do not have those layers, because I strongly believe that will make the world a better place.
Excellent. Thank you, Lexi. Thank you, Lexi, so much. And Karen, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Fleshman. Don't worry, I'm known as Common Sense Karen on Twitter. I founded my company, Racy Conversations, in 2014. We are a workplace workshop facilitation company, and our mission is to inspire the anti-racist generation. And I come to this work from a long career earlier in the immigrants' rights movement, later in workforce development, preparing young adults of color for corporate careers. And in 2014, when Darren Wilson was not indicted for killing Mike Brown, and I heard from a couple young Black women, mentees of mine, about the nonstop harm they were experiencing in the workplace, that's when I decided to shift focus from preparing young adults of color for the workplace to preparing workplaces for young adults of color. And I am so grateful. Dominique Hollins is one of my close friends, and all the folks on this panel, I learned so much from them, from Lily, from Lexi, from Jared, and I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Karen. Lily.
Hey, so hi, I'm Lily. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Just finished a big move, so I'm still surrounded by boxes, which you can't see. I am a consultant, and I've been doing this work for quite a few years now, basically helping companies get it, helping companies do it right. I really frame and center all of my work on impact, recognizing that to do this work and to do it right means going deep, means creating not just anti-racist experiences and working to make people better, but working to make systems, cultures, structures, processes, outcomes, impacts better. And so my work with clients is to help them not suck, in a world that does. And it's difficult, it's a journey, and it's why I'm really excited to be here with all of y'all today, in recognition that this is not going to be a one-time conversation, that this is not going to be something that happens over the course of a week, a month, or even a year, but that we're going to be doing this work and making our companies better and good and just over the course of many years, over the course of our lifetime, so that our children and our children's children can live in a better world. I'm super, super stoked. We're going to be talking about some great things today.
Thank you, Lily. And bring us home, Jared.
Thank you, Jared Carroll. I use he, him pronouns. And I was 20 years old and I was camping in the mountains of Boulder, Colorado, and I told my best friend Amy that my dad was gay, and she said, "Big fucking deal." And I was a college athlete, and I had carried around this weight of stigma since I was 14 when he told me he was gay, that I wasn't supposed to have a gay dad, and I had never told anyone for 6 years. So what I do in my work is at the intersection of inclusive leadership, strategic storytelling, and really the EQ, the empathy, the compassion, the curiosity, to understand that you're going to get tons of awesome tips and strategies and how to do recruiting and retention and all those things. They're all valuable. And it's really about, as much as it is about what you do to be anti-racist, to be, all the things we're going to be talking about, it's just as much about who you are. Who do you be? How do you be in the world? And so I use my personal story to model vulnerability, to kind of offer a model for others to see, hey, we're all covering, we're all afraid, we're all uncertain what to do, and sometimes we need other people to bring us along on that journey. And so that's what I hope you all get from this panel, from this discussion from me, is that as much as it is about what you do, it's about who you are that's really going to be carry this momentum individually and collectively forward and sustainably.
So now hopefully you all can understand why they were selected as a panel. They not only carry a wealth of knowledge individually, but collectively. This is very powerful. Also, they may have some provocative perspectives, and that was intentional. This conversation tends to get, for lack of a better phrase, watered down or softened so that people can receive the message, but sometimes it is what it is. I hate to use that phrase given recent news, but that's another conversation for another day. In this context, the truth is what it is. You have to accept the truth in order to move forward. And so we're going to give you that the loving way today. I'm also going to echo what Lily said. This is not a one-stop shop. We're not curing racism. This isn't going to end this journey. Wherever you are, whether this is the beginning, the middle, or part of your excelling through your knowledge and growing through this process, today's goal is to bring us all on a similar page of understanding. And with that knowledge, you do the individual work to keep moving forward. I'm also going to encourage you to take notes. There are some things you think you know, and there are things you have no idea. I ask you to take notes as you go through this. If we answer some of your questions, cross it off. And if there are things you're left with, that is your homework. So whatever you don't understand, that is the beginning and the continuation of that knowledge. And last but not least, who are you trying to become? Are you trying to become a better person? Are you trying to become a better leader? Well, whoever that person is you're aspiring towards, let's let this conversation be a gateway as you go through this journey. And we're going to do it through the medium of one of the toughest discussions, anti-racism. So let's talk about what that looks like, and specifically in the workplace. What we're going to cover is distinction between doing no harm and being anti-racist. Nowadays, it's very easy to start to conflate some of these terms and to believe that one means the other, and it is not true. So we're going to really clarify what that means, and especially get the context of our panelists. What does anti-racism look like through the lens of the employee life cycle? Well, why would we do that? When we get there, we're going to talk about why we're looking at the employee life cycle and how being anti-racist can facilitate a more inclusive organization. And what next steps will you take to build an anti-racist culture within your organization? This isn't just about the conversation. We've been doing that for a long time. This is about carrying the conversation forward through action. I want us to be reminded that Angela Davis, a renowned political activist of which all of you should be aware of, and if not, Google Angela Davis and her story and her literature. She's been on this movement for a long time. She says, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. One is more of a stagnant position. You are just not engaged. No, this is a moment where action is required. So it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. And to further that, I love what Ijeoma Oluo says, the author of So You Want to Talk About Race. The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism, to be anti-racist. We know it exists. To pretend to be free is to ignore it, almost like saying you're colorblind, which is also offensive. But anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including within yourself, which is a perpetual thing. This journey, while it may seem outward, starts inward, and it starts with you. That's the only way forward. I brought up the employee life cycle and exclude that this isn't the sexiest slide. I made it. Sam does much better slides than I do. This is not my forte. However, I wanted to kind of give you the idea of how I at We360 think about framing this discussion for executive leaders. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, some companies use what I consider to be a healthy framework of workforce, workplace, and marketplace. Workforce is who and how you hire. Workplace is how does it feel when they get there? How are you promoting and developing them? And then the marketplace is how does that diversity show up for your customers and the services and the products that you build? At each stage of this, the talent at your company is navigating your organization. And they have one primary goal, which is to succeed. I don't know anybody that joins a company with the goal to fail. They want to be recruited and hired well, where they're interviewing you and trying to be successful through the process. They want to be developed and they want to grow based off of the merits of their performance in the organization and the support from their leadership team. And then lastly, should this happen as a true meritocracy, they move through the ranks. They reflect your leadership, having absorbed all of the knowledge of the organization, and now it shows more prominently in your products and services. And the company's responsibility throughout this process is to retain you. You are there for a number of reasons, primarily for profitability, but we can't be successful as employees if our environment is not conducive to our success. So as you think about building this out, we're going to go through today each stage in this process and what you can tangibly do to be anti-racist in recruiting, to check your own privilege, to look at some of the unconscious biases that could be preventing you from hiring and recruiting the best talent, from sourcing them, from catering to their needs in the interviewing and recruiting process. Then we're going to talk about some of the challenges through performance reviews, through giving feedback. What does that look like, and how can you catch some of your unconscious bias and learn to exhibit this new behavior? And last, and this is going to come more from leadership, where are you going? And how are you making sure your succession plans reflect the future of your customer base? That's what we're going to talk about today, and how anti-racism is an effective tool to making sure we can navigate this with as little barrier to entry for your employees as possible. That being said, for our panelists, our first question is, what are the key differences between doing no harm and being anti-racist in the workplace? Where do we start? As we started to pull this together, Lily, I think you had an excellent perspective on the differences. You'd like?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. So for me, doing no harm requires acknowledging that the world around us is actively harmful. Right? It requires acknowledging that racism, sexism, etc. Today we're going to focus on racism exists in our world, and that doing no harm is already a radical act. But I see doing no harm as a company that interrupts the inequities of the world. Anti-racism, by comparison, requires a company that dismantles the inequities of the world. These are two fundamentally different approaches to me. For me, doing no harm means ensuring that your company is okay, ensuring that your company is not one of the bad ones. Anti-racism requires going a step further and committing to your company not only being the eye in a global storm, but to ending racism everywhere, right? That is a tall order, that is huge, right? And that's where I'm excited to talk about the distinction today.
I also think that from a different perspective, I think that Lily's really great at talking about these like very company level type things of how the company's interacting. What I'm about to say is very much people to people. If you actually talk to a lot of people who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color in white spaces, you will find out that many of us are not receiving active racism from the company at large on a day-to-day basis. We will receive active racism on how a company responds to certain things, Black Lives Matter and that kind of thing. But we're receiving the active racism and the microaggressions from people that we work with every single day. And so doing no harm is, for example, a manager who is aware that because I am a Black woman, I may experience certain things in the workplace that other people may not experience and may actually have evidence of those things. And because that specific manager did not do those things, they do not defend me. They do not protect me. And therefore, I don't feel protected. I do not trust anyone. And I curl up like a child in a corner. And then that really affects our managerial and employee dynamic. Because my manager has decided, well, I'm not a racist. And I didn't say those things to Lexi. So I didn't do any harm. Even though my manager is very aware that other people are saying things, are doing things, are actively contributing to microaggressive and racist behavior that is affecting my performance in my day-to-day life. And to me, from a daily practice and a day-to-day on the ground perspective, that's what it looks like. And then, using myself as an example, you have people who will leave the company because if my manager, whose job is to protect me, does not protect me and instead, and worse, says, well, I didn't say the racist thing. I didn't do the racist act towards you, right? Then who am I supposed to be protected by? If my manager does not have this understanding that because the way that I look and therefore how I walk in this world, my experience is different. And when I say this person talked to me in a certain way, when I explain those microaggressive behaviors, regardless if the manager understands them completely, but does not take affirmative action in that to at least let me know that they are there for me, then now we have a racist relationship.
That was very pointed, and that is powerful because, again, Lily gave kind of the corporate construct and how we look at it from one frame, and then Lexi brings it down to the day-to-day, because this is what managers need to know. Inaction is an action. By doing nothing, you are perpetuating the behavior and then become a part of the problem. Karen or Jared, anything you want to add to that as we dive into each section of the employee experience? Thank you, Lexi and Lily.
Yes, I snapped for all of that. Thank you so much. And Lexi, I don't know if you're seeing the chat, but you're getting so much love and affirmation in the chat about what you just shared. I would just add that racism is America's operating system, has been our operating system for 400 years, is the foundation of profit, is the foundation of these companies. So to me, an anti-racist workplace extends beyond what is going on within the four walls of the company, although that is extremely important, and goes to literally every aspect of the company's operations, from what it produces, right? Is it producing subprime products? Is it producing products that are of quality for everybody? Is it we know that, for example, Black women activists on social media platforms get subjected to all kinds of hatred. So are they protected by these platforms, or is it like freedom of speech and everybody is equal on the platform? It's every single aspect. What vendors do you use? How you show up in your community? What you're investing in, and also understanding the whole origins of your company. Many companies were founded on the profits of slavery. So when I think of an anti-racist workplace, what I want to see companies do is produce a report This is how our company has profited from racism. This is who works here and how much they're compensated and what their levels are. This is every aspect, you know, who our vendors are, et cetera. And then this is our plan of what we are going to do to change this. And this is the stakeholder group, including both internal and external people who are going to be holding us to account to this. And we're going to be transparent and public about this entire process that we're undertaking to transform into an anti-racist company.
And that's and that's what it is. It's a process. There is no, if you are looking for the kind of one-shot solution, you yourself have not properly gone through the process of the discovery for what you need internally. This is, like she said, this has been happening for 400 years. Our proximity to oppression determines how familiar it is to us, how much we have to experience it. And if you are just becoming familiar, there is a lot that has to be done, but it starts with you. And thank you for that note, Karen. Jerry, if you don't mind, I can hop over to the next question. That way we can get some questions from our community as well. And so let me just go back here, and I want to make sure we can see our panelists as we're going through. And now let's get into the meat of what that looks like in recruiting and hiring. All right, when you know, what does it look like in action to do no harm in recruiting and hiring? And then, you know, in the interest of time, just so we can think about both, what does it look like in action to be anti-racist? So one is doing no harm, and then one is being anti-racist.
I have opinions.
Let's start there.
All right, so I feel like the biggest difference is, first of all, in your goals for each of these. The goal of doing no harm, and you know, Lexi B's explanation was really, really good and solid. I use a slightly different definition. When I say doing no harm, I mean the outputs of the system are fine and good and okay. Not amazing, just good enough. The goal of doing no harm with recruitment and hiring for most companies looks like creating a talent pool that reflects the pipeline and hiring a workforce that reflects the talent pool. And usually they do this by reaching out to universities and other programs to supplement their usual recruiting processes to make sure that things are fair, right? Fairness is a big focus of doing no harm. They also might train their hiring managers to interrupt their biases on an individual level, again, to make sure that they're being fair to do no harm. Now, this is very intensely contrasted with what I understand anti-racism to be. And the goal of anti-racism isn't just to create a talent pool that reflects the pipeline, but to reimagine and create a better pipeline and a better process to hire a workforce that reflects the world. And they achieve that goal by going beyond, above and beyond what most companies would consider is enough, right? What most companies would consider is good enough. They might create partnerships with local community from the very start, committing to building that talent from the very beginning. They might create core skills and competencies that reflect a vision for a more just future, like let's say, I don't know, ability to communicate with and work effectively with diverse teams, and then hire for it, right? What it means to recruit and hire in an anti-racist way means envisioning what an anti-racist world would look like, and then working backwards until you get to the recruiting and hiring process, so that you're not just being fair, you are being just. You are being aspirational with the people you bring in and the skills you want them to have, so that, you know, you should not be able to hire white supremacists in an anti-racist organization, right? In an organization that does no harm, you can hire a white supremacist as long as they're quiet about it, right? For me, that's not good enough, right? It's just not good enough. So those are the key differences for me, right? We need to be very, very clear about what the core skills and competencies for an anti-racist org would look like, and also what we won't tolerate, right? For me, just being a white supremacist is like, you cannot have an anti-racist org and like not have white supremacists hate you. If that's the case, then you're not anti-racist enough, right? Work harder.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I just want to add a real life example that I think maybe illustrates Lily's point. I was working at a company last year and I was doing some training, some coaching for the talent acquisition leadership team. So a big company, there were about 50 of them. So I was working with their top six, 8 people. And we were talking about pipeline and what are your sources and who are you talking to? And they said, oh yeah, we got all that. I said, okay, well then how come things aren't changing? And they said, well, nothing's going to change until the hiring managers get training around this stuff. And I said, I agree that they also need training. But if you're using that as an excuse because it's hard, because I get it, you're a recruiter and you got to give them candidates and they're saying, hey, we need these people yesterday and we don't have time to wait, and I get it. So your job then becomes, instead of saying like, yes, sir, sorry, we'll get you those 3 white men on the slate, what can you do to learn how to be more influential and committed to have those conversations with them and say, you know what, I get it, we're all under stress. I get it, you wanted this candidate last week, and I need 2 more weeks to get you who I think should be on this candidate slate. That's hard work because you have people above you pressuring. So it's that kind of mindset that needs to, that recruiters and people in the kind of the beginning of the process need to adapt and adopt. And if they don't, then they're just going to cave into the system that's existing, and they're just going to keep, well, hey, I tried, and they needed the candidate yesterday, so there's nothing I could do, and then it perpetuates.
And here's something you can do for recruiters on the call and hiring managers. Take note. Let me just give you a little free advice 101. Y'all need to fix these job descriptions. That's what you need to do. And the reason why is because most of the time, 60 to 70% of what's in a job description, applicants actually don't need to do that job well. And I've heard it time and time again from recruiters and hiring managers that they say things like, well, we don't know exactly what we need. That sounds like a you problem, not a candidacy problem. So I need hiring managers to really figure out what they need in order for this job function and this person to fill this job to be successful. Make it very clear to the recruiter. The recruiter write those things down, get that checked and verified twice, and then put that out in the world. Because of white supremacy and because of racism, there are literal studies that show that white men will always apply for a job. They can have 2 of the 10 bullet points together and they will always apply for a job. And why is that? Because the world has told them that they can literally have 2/10 of what is required and they can still receive it. The world has told me as a dark-skinned Black woman with curly hair from St. Louis, Missouri, that if there are 10 bullet points, I have to have 20. When in actual fact, there's only 5 bullet points that are needed in order for me to be successful at these jobs. And so one of the ways, again, on the ground, that grassroots mentality is we really need to get these job descriptions together because, like Lily said, if we're going to build an anti-racist hiring practice, well, you would like to attract people of diverse places and faces and flavors and twerks and food and all these things. But you can't attract them if you have job descriptions that actually don't meet what you actually need. So therefore, you as the hiring manager are lying about what you need. And 1 or 2 things are happening. Either A, you are a white supremacist and you want somebody who is white, straight, and male to take that role. And you can't say that out loud because we have discriminatory laws. And or B, you do not know what you want yet. And both of those are problematic. Figure out the job description.
And that, I think that's
one super quick thing.
Oh, go ahead, Lily. Mm-hmm.
To sort of add a controversial idea on top of that, if you only need 5 out of 10 bullet points to do the job, and you're hiring white men that meet 2 out of 10 bullet points, you can do a hell of a lot of good for your workforce if you force everyone to reapply for the job with the right bullet points. You'll be firing a hell of a lot of white men. Just saying.
Let's be clear. The goal is, let's be clear, out of the spirit of moderation. The goal is not to eliminate white men. Let's
No, it's not.
let's be
The
It
goal
let's
is
be
to find
clear.
the people
The
with the
goal
skills
is
to do
to
the
find
job.
exactly to find the right talent at the right time to solve the problem at hand, which is not always for white men by white men and the recipient of white men.
Exactly.
That there is more talent to be experienced. And if I
Exactly.
could summarize some of the key things that I heard from this particular question on the topic of recruitment and hiring is to do no harm means staying out of trouble. We just looking at our house. Is it clean enough? Did we sweep the dirt under the couch, or did you actually vacuum? Did you make sure that there is a space for everyone, that they're comfortable? Think about the hospitality you provide when someone comes into your home. Does your organization suit all of the guests that you have invited in to solve the problems you were then be paying us for? Because that's doing no harm. And alternatively, to be anti-racist, in the words of John Lewis, we're going to get into some good trouble. And that means we're going to start going around and getting messy. And we're going to say, oh, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. Because if you're a leader and your goal is quarter over quarter growth, then you need to understand the challenges that are prohibiting that growth. And if it is rooted in anti-racism, identify it, call it out, and then apply some of the actions that we just discussed. So that, in the context of recruiting and hiring, is a good start. Because if you start there, you're already ahead of the game. So thank you all so much for that context. Oh, go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
I would snaps to everything that's been said. I would add, in addition to the job requirements, the qualifications. So for example, if you are requiring a bachelor's degree, when that remains so far out of reach for so many people, that in and of itself is going to eliminate a lot of folks from your hiring possibility. The other thing, how do most of us find our jobs is through people that we know. And what is really driving systemic racial inequality are nice white parents, right? There's a fantastic new podcast on the New York Times. I highly recommend everybody listen to it. But it is nice white parents who, part of our thing is exchanging social capital. Oh, your son is looking for a job, we're hiring at my company. So it's all of those kind of private interactions that are driving this. So if you are a person of privilege within the workplace and you are exchanging social capital to increase your net wealth, you have to be extremely intentional. I'm going to stop providing opportunities only to folks within my social network, and I'm intentionally disrupting that and going outside my social network to ensure that other folks have access to these opportunities as well.
Yep. And we're not going to wait. You don't have to wait on your organization to do it. I must preface this by saying your organization may not be ready, so get them ready. You are now the agent of change. Right now, many of your organizations are leaning on the handful of people of color. They are overwhelmed. They need your support as well. So while your company is trying to figure it out, you build the infrastructure now. So when your company catches up to you, you can say, here's the work we've already done. You can meet them where they are and carry it forward. Don't wait and use the excuse as I heard in the example today. You be the change you want to see, and when everyone catches up, they will follow you. All right. Now let's take this over to, and I might have to put some concepts together just so everyone can get to all of the questions. The next is growth and development. Now this is where things get messy. When you're in your 101s, when it's peer feedback, when it's performance reviews, when money is on the table, this is where it gets messy. So what does it look like in action to do no harm in the growth and development cycle of the employee life, the employee experience? And what does it look like in action to be anti-racist? So one is more passive and one is intentional and active.
Do no harm is, hey, we tried our best, but Karen got the position ahead of you. And not this Karen. Although it could have been that Karen. Anti-racist is, you know what? Gosh, I'm looking up here and I see 3 out of 100 people who look like you. And I'm going to do everything I can to sponsor and promote and highlight and give you opportunities so that you have the best overall resume, so to speak, to get that position. So it goes back to what we've been talking about, that intentionality from a leadership, someone above you who's responsible for making that decision on if and how and when you're going to grow.
I think being an anti-racist in growth and hiring is having a manager that, number one, from day one says, this is what I see in you. Here are the areas of opportunities that I need you to grow. I'm going to actively put a plan together. And we're going to be talking about this because growth and opportunity and promotions are in 11 months. It's a manager who's not coming to you the month before the promotion and saying, let's talk about this now. Also, having a wonderful manager who is anti-racist is a manager who goes to their diverse team of 5 people, for example, and says, I just spoke to the senior director, and it turns out that we have 5 major projects that we have to work on today. Each of you are getting one of those projects. Instead of the manager that says, well, because Susie has done this before, she's going to get 2 of these 5, which means one of you won't get one. And so being an anti-racist manager to me is this continued effort to be fair with your team, but also to be transparent, to have one-on-ones in the calendar once a week. And the one-on-ones aren't just saying, how is life? The one-on-ones are saying, we have a one-on-one document and we're talking about not only the status of your work, but also what do I need from you as your manager? And what do you need from me as your manager? How can I make this a better working relationship? How are we getting you to your goals? You say you want to be promoted next year. Well, next year is now. So what are we doing right now? So when I walk into the conversations of promotion, I have your name right there because you've done the work 6 months ago and we're ready to go. I don't have to fight for anything.
That's an excellent example. People don't leave companies, they leave managers. And those types of conversations do not always take place. So one, it's a developmental problem. There are a ton of managers that simply don't know how to do it. They don't care. It doesn't matter what race, ethnicity, background you are. So that is a challenge. That is not an excuse. It's just a reality. And on top of that, it is exacerbated by underrepresented minorities. And we're not just talking about Black people, although we tend to be the brunt end of a lot of sticks. This is how that impact shows up. So I just want to make it very clear, and that was a poignant point. We got one or two other thoughts there.
Yeah, I want to say that part of the challenge is, here we are in Silicon Valley where the mantra is fail fast, right? But that's only if you're a white man. If you're a woman or a person of color and you make a mistake, you are viewed as unqualified, this person doesn't know what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to extend the same support for making mistakes to everybody equitably across the board. The other thing I will say is that one of the times when my phone rings off the hook is at annual review time. So many women of color in particular get these performance reviews with feedback they have never received in person. And it's devastating. And a lot of it is very intensely personal. And this is going to affect their compensation. This is going to affect their ability to get promoted. And they've never seen this before. So if you are a manager and there's something, it's easier for me to give feedback to Jared because I feel more comfortable around him, but there's something about Lexi that makes me feel uncomfortable giving her feedback. So I withhold it and then I just spring it on her in this review process. I am undermining Lexi's ability to grow. And it's on me as a manager to overcome whatever it is that's making me feel uncomfortable giving Lexi that feedback and feel fine about giving it to Jared so he has the opportunity to grow.
Something real quick that I want to add. It's really sexy when we talk about this work to focus on how individual managers can get better, but let's not forget that the goal is not to have you be the only decent manager in your company. Because when that happens, literally every person of color that is not on your team is still going to be having a god-awful time, right? So the job, what we're doing here, and Karen was talking a little bit about this, is not only training individual managers to be fair, right, and to not be awful people, but to also ensure that there are standardized processes and systems across all managers such that it is functionally impossible for a manager to be discriminating in this way against their reports, right? That's what systemic change means. I don't want us to come away from this conversation thinking, oh, if I'm a decent manager, then I can save my company, because guess what? You can't, right? Rather than focus on that, how can you get your company to create decent managers by default? I think is the question when we think about systemic design. And that gets into really tough conversations about how do you train your managers? How do you select your managers? How do you promote people to become managers? How do you ensure that you resolve these problems before they come up in the first place, so that shitty managers don't have to keep, coming to sessions like this going like, oh, I just realized I'm an awful manager. How do I become better, right? We can't rely on that as a strategy for change.
Not only that, for organizations, and I've seen this time and time again, if they're a bad manager in marketing, they're a bad manager in sales, they're a bad manager in engineering, please stop recycling terrible talent, move them out of the organization and make room for the people that should be there. I have been at too many companies where it is known that a man got in trouble for sexual harassment on another country or on another team, and they secretly moved him around because they would never do that for a woman. And so to see that, to actively see it and eradicate it, that is an example. Another tangible example is succession planning. If your team looks the same from last year as it did the year before, is this probably going to look next year? And right now it's September, you're planning for 2021, your succession plan should know what the future of your company would be. If you know where the trajectory of your sales and your customers are going, your leadership team should reflect those customers. And then last but certainly not least, pay equity. There's always time to review the salaries of your employees to ensure that they are actually at market rate. It may be expensive now, but it's even more expensive when they leave. So I'm going to encourage you to do a pay equity review and make sure that everyone who is not made whole is made whole. And that is active anti-racism, identifying a problem, making a commitment to change it, and then following up with that action. By the way, August 13th is Black Women Pay Equity Day. That's only 7 days from now. You can start there. We're really the furthest behind, but happy to further consult if you have questions. And
I have never met an overpaid Black woman, so please do.
We have never met an overpaid Black woman. And so maybe it's time. But what we want is to just be paid what we are worth. We don't need any extra and any less. We will be fine on our own. But what we all aspire to is to have enough to achieve what we're seeking to achieve. Now, this is the last section, and I want you all to answer this quickly because I really want to answer as many questions as possible. We have some great questions. Here is what we hear all the time. Leadership, and not so much marketplace, but I'm forcing because it's the business case for diversity. What does it look like in action to do no harm in positions of leadership and in the marketplace as you are showing up for your customers? I'm sure you can think of some ideas where companies did not do enough assessment before they went out to the marketplace. And then part two is, what does it look like in action to be anti-racist when it comes to leadership and how you show up to your customers, etc. So who is particularly passionate, and maybe just one or two so we can get to some questions. Lily, you're
I have
up.
a one-liner, super quick. Oh. Leadership that does no harm will commit to diversifying your company and say the right things. Leaders that are anti-racist will tie the diversification of their company into their bonuses and their salary, and willingly take a hit to those things if they fail. That's the difference. That's it.
Boom.
Are you willing to back up the talk with the real change? That's it.
Boom. Anybody else want to? Karen, I see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that companies that are anti-racist are cognizant that median Black net wealth is projected to be 0 by 2053. Median Latinx net wealth is projected to be 0 by 2073, and are actively engaged in changing those trajectories. And a large part goes to who they're lobbying in Congress, who they're donating money to. You know, America's vast wealth inequality, the fact that Jeff Bezos became the world's first trillionaire during the pandemic, is not by accident. It's done by engineering, it's done by policy. So when you have these companies putting up a Black Lives Matter Instagram post, but you see who they actually donate to in Congress, and you see the kinds of laws that these folks are passing, there is a fundamental contradiction there. And we have to regulate our marketplace. There's no way we are going to end this level of inequality just through private action. It's going to take collective action.
Absolutely. Jared?
Yeah, back to what I said at the very beginning. A do no harm leader tries to do, maybe he supports an ERG, maybe he speaks at a D&I event, but there's really not, it's performative. An anti-racist actually makes the commitments that Lily and Karen and others have been saying, and actually risks his, and it usually is a him, his social capital, his professional capital, his career capital, because he believes in that this is who he is. And unfortunately, frankly, I can't think of any off the top of my head that actually are that. There might be some out there.
I like Jack Dorsey. I like Jack Dorsey from Twitter. And not just because Lexi works there, because I genuinely, and having nothing to do with tech, I genuinely felt like Jack had some sincerity in his actions. And I was like, oh, okay, I found one.
Okay.
And, I would like to not feel like it was one, but, I'll give Jack some kudos.
I'll grant you that.
Anything else you all want to add to the leadership piece? I have a thought, but I want to give you the space. Lexi, anything you want to say, since I just gave some kudos to head boss in charge?
Well, I'm not here representing Twitter, but yes,
Of course
I
not.
of course you do.
Of course not. That's just me acknowledging. So here's the last thing I will say. That a leader and an executive that does no harm is checking the box. I want you to become very familiar with the check the box. The check the box is, I'm going to say and do whatever you ask. Please just make it stop. I don't want any more inquiries. They are hoping for you to do the fastest thing possible in order to essentially stop the bleeding. And that bleeding is the PR, the bad press. They want immediate action so it can just stop. But they're not considering the impact. They're not looking at the long-term strategy. That's a do no harm leader. And they may or may not be there as long, but their leadership team will reflect those actions. And in some way they're harmful, and we need to get them out of the way. An anti-racist leader that will not only make the commitment, because that's nice. I've seen a lot of commitments, and I've also heard a lot of apologies, but they're going to follow through with them. There is accountability. If your CEO, if your chief diversity officer, or your diversity leader does not have a quarterly update meeting to show you, here's what we talked about last quarter, here's what we've done since then, and if there is no scorecard of accountability that you follow in perpetuity until you see it through, then you don't have an anti-racist leader, because they're checking the box. So make sure your company is not checking the box, and you'll know, because it'll reflect in the leadership team, and it'll start to show up in how you build your product. So with that being said, to our audience, what questions do you have for our panelists? And we're going to have Sam curate the questions. I'm going to take us off of screen share, and then I'm going to allow Sam to choose the questions that are most important.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dom. And so many amazing questions have come in. I'm just going to put in the chat so that you see it. This is from Goyan, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing, but I just thought this was a good starter. Would love to see some portion of compensation performance bonuses tied directly to DEI results. What kind of metrics actually make sense for something like that? So perhaps that's a good place to start. Curious how you would tie some of those bonuses and incentives to seeing results around DEI.
A few companies ago, I worked for a company called Airbnb back when it was a very, very tiny startup. And I remember that a company like Airbnb that really stands on these principles of belonging, people at the company started saying things like, we stand on these principles of belonging, but I don't think people in these walls are actually doing that act. So the COO at the time, Belinda Johnson, came up with this wonderful thing where on our performance review, and most companies for a performance review, you have like, here are your strengths, here are your areas of opportunity, right? And you do a self-review, and then people review you, and then the goal would be that the information that you put in your self-review in line with your manager's feedback and other people's feedback would then create your formalized review. They started doing this thing where you had now your strengths, your areas of opportunity, and then they had another section where you had to specifically give examples of how you contributed to the mission of Airbnb through your work. And the mission literally was belonging, which to me means equity and diversity and inclusion. And so you had to give names of, I worked with these people and this is how I did A, B, and C. And obviously your manager would check back with those people. And so it was literally tied to your review as an individual. So it was no longer, when we did our review every 6 months, it was no longer this like, what did you do well for your job? And what things do you want to focus on next half? And what do what could you have done better? Now it's like, how are you actually doing things that drive this mission forward of diversity and equity and belonging? And that was the first time in my whole career where it was so concrete. And you know how when you do your review, you have one of those internet software systems where if you don't answer a portion of it, you can't submit. And so if you tried not to answer that portion, you just couldn't submit. So either A, you're doing this review fully, or you aren't, right? And it was the first time that a company from leadership, from HR, was saying, you have to actually tell us what you think you did. And your manager, in their review submission, when they went to your name and did your review, they had to tell us what you think you did. So now no longer is it, oh, well, I helped open a door for someone. It was like you had to do something so concrete that you knew it and your manager knew about it. So when you talked about it at your one-on-one, your manager, of course, knew about it, right? Other people knew about it. So it was like this clearly big enough thing that it wasn't just this small act of kindness. It was your commitment every 6 months to do something to make people or the people you're working with in the company feel belonged and feel equitable. And I found that very fascinating.
Yeah. And to the person that asked about the metrics, what I teach at We 360 is the metrics change by level. So the metrics for the board of directors are going to be different from the metrics from the C-suite, is different from director and above, people managers, and individual contributors. What we would recommend is at each level, based on their degree of influence, what the board of directors can do is very different than what your employee resource group member can do. So at every level, what it seems to be a quantifiable action, employee resource group, individual contributors may be joining ERGs. They may be signing up to participate in these sessions. You either make it optional or you integrate it in your compliance training. So some things everybody needs to know and some things are optional. So that's just one way of doing that. And there are a lot of consultants that can help walk you through selecting the right ones at the right time. Okay.
So something I want to add on the metrics, I take a slightly different approach. I think rather than focusing on what can you do to make someone feel belonging, because I do think that the challenge of that is you could end up in a place where it's essentially a popularity contest. And I've seen that happen before with one company that I worked with. People were sort of just trading favors and it didn't end up working out. What I found work with companies that have tried to tackle this challenge is rather than conceptualizing D&I as this feel good, how do we make the minorities feel included sort of goal, they have worked very hard to understand how D&I relates to their daily job and how they can actually push forward through what they're doing, let's say in marketing, sales, engineering, product, etc., and create a D&I impact through that. And what I found works really well with taking that approach is that you create so much more buy-in because suddenly everyone can see exactly how D&I relates to their work rather than everyone feeling like this is a mandatory, like, great, now I have to be like very visibly, performatively nice to the Asian person down the hall, right? Which I find, sometimes that doesn't work out. But rather than saying, were you good or did you build belonging for X person, you can then ask, did your product resonate more with underserved, underrepresented populations? And guess what? We already have metrics around that, and the metrics are not going to lie. right? So you're not even going to be self-reporting. We can see through the work that you've done. And I like that approach. It is simultaneously more impactful, I feel like, and takes the sort of individual resentment out of it. Because look, if you didn't do work to make your product inclusive, like you just didn't, right? And that's how it's going to be.
Thank you, Lily. And then Sam, let's see, we have about 20 or so minutes before we close out. Let's see if we can get through 5 or 6 questions. And for the panelists, if you all have a 30-second response for things that you're super passionate about or super informed in, let's see if we can get as many questions answered as possible. And thank you all so much. Sam, what do we have next?
Sounds great. I think this one's a good one to tackle. It's from Claire. Thanks for writing in, Claire. She asked, how can an entry-level employee affect change within a slow-moving hierarchy? So that might be an interesting one for the panel.
It's really, and as we've stated at the very outset of this panel, there's no like one answer or one kind of, hey, I'm going to give you this in 30 seconds at Dominic's request, but really looking for I imagine if this is something you're thinking about, that you're very in tune with who are the people that you're meeting, maybe not even your direct team, your direct company, and building those relationships. Whenever I enter into a new company or a long-term contract, I'm always looking like, okay, here are my people that I have to report to and all the things. Oh, but this person over here seems to reply well to that email. And really taking the time to build those relationships, especially if they're more senior, which I guess everyone would be more senior than you if you're entry level, and making it very clear what you're about and what you care about and what you want to learn in that area. So it just kind of grows your presence as like, oh, this is the person who cares about this.
I'm going to say something slightly controversial, which is be good at your job. And I think that we don't talk about that enough. So I completely agree, ditto to what everything Jared said. And I also think that's part of being good at your job. And so I'm always kind of the career coach telling entry-level folks, I'm like, well, first and foremost, we need to make sure that you're good, right? And you being good is being good at your job. So whatever that means, learn your job well, because your quality of work, right, will shine to a certain extent and will give you some more fluency and more power in these spaces, while you are, like Jared said, building these relationships with senior leadership. Senior leadership is not going to align themselves with someone that has great ideas, but their work product is whack. You need to have both. And a lot of people don't want to hear that because they assume that I'm saying, well, your work product outweighs, diversity and equity, which I am not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that I want to make sure that when you speak, there's an imaginary microphone and everyone turns around and says, what she said, do what she said. Mm-hmm. And part of building that microphone is being great at what you do, and never take that for granted and put in effort to do that as well.
The question was I saw one of the comments, someone said, what question are we answering? And someone said, what can an entry-level employee do to affect change within D&I within their organization? And the summary is to build relationships, to do your job well. And I would just throw on there to be a sponge. Not only are you doing what they hired you for, but you need to learn the ropes of the ecosystem that you have entered. So you need to be watching things before you start making recommendations. If you weren't hired for DEI, you don't want to be the DEI person in the room off the bat. Do your job well, and then develop insights that where DEI can be a tool to advance that goal. Karen, I see you unmuted. Did you have anything before you go to the next question?
I would say approach it the way union organizers approach organizing the workplace. And what they do, they write a list of everybody who works there, and they put them in 3 categories: the antis, the neutrals, and the friendlies. And they start with the friendlies first, and they go through them and they flip them one by one. So there's real strength in numbers. So identify the other folks, the other entry-level folks who you think might be friendly to making this a more diverse, inclusive workplace, and start with them, and then start to move into your neutrals.
Excellent recommendation. Thank you. Thank you all. And then Sam?
Yeah, so this one's from Olivia, and I appreciate the honesty here, Olivia. I'm just going to put it in the chat so you all can see it before I ask it. But Olivia asks, do you have tips for telling a, quote, do no harm manager that his hands-off approach makes me feel alone and vulnerable without experiencing repercussions for my honesty. We're the only two people on the team, and he has so much more privilege and power than me. How do you navigate those types of conversations?
So maybe not controversial advice. Your ability to give feedback upwards to your manager without repercussions is dependent on psychological safety. If you don't feel psychologically safe with your manager, no tip that we can give you will assure an outcome that doesn't involve you being retaliated against. Knowing that, please get another manager. Like that's the only advice that I can share 100% and feel very good about. It's really tough, right? When our managers don't get it, and when our managers don't create those environments that are safe for us to give feedback. But please don't feel like you are responsible for that. If your manager is shitty, it's their fault, right? What you can do is get out, and if you can't get out, take care of yourself.
Yeah, I like that, Lily. And I don't know how familiar you are, Olivia, or anyone else is with nonviolent communication kind of principles, but the concept of really being clear with what you need from the relationship, from the assignment, from whatever the context is. And being, it's a little scary because it's like, it's vulnerable and it's like uncertain, but here's what I need and here's why, and then let him or her respond. And they might fumble, they might not have a satisfactory, but you're kind of, in a way, collecting data. Does this person have the skill set, the relationship skills, the commitment to me as a person to have this conversation, to move things forward? And they may or may not, but they might if they're presented with this approach. Doesn't always work, but it's kind of sussing them out to see maybe there's something that they haven't shown you that they could.
I would echo what both Lily and Jared had to say. And there are people who are active harm agents in the workplace. And then there's other folks who are just very inexperienced and have extreme lack of self-awareness. So if you can approach them and say, hey, you know, this is what I'm experiencing right now. And I'm bringing this up because I care about you and I care about me, and I want to have a really productive work experience. And this is what needs to change in order for me to do that. I think that kind of tone of conversation can be very productive, with the understanding that this person, you know, is lacking self-awareness and is not actively engaged in causing you harm, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And then I also like to quickly add, like checking privilege, is that I've been in situations where I did not have the resources to get a new job at that time. I've been in situations where it was like, my manager is literally a sociopath and I cannot get a new job right now. I also want to honor that we're in the middle of a pandemic. Jobs are scarce. Unless you are a senior level engineer, jobs are very scarce. So I don't want you taking this as like quitting my job and getting a job on Monday. That is not what people are telling you, sis. I would also like to add that I've been in situations with managers who I've tried to have that conversation with, like Karen said, and they don't get it. They're literally just sociopaths. And so what I would do in that situation is, once you kind of figure out what category your manager sits in, is that I would always use data and I would always have receipts in writing. And so instead of going to your manager and saying, you make me feel, I don't feel comfortable being vulnerable, if your manager doesn't have an emotional IQ, they don't know what that word means. So it's really just going over their head, and now they're irritated because you're asking for things and they just don't know what that means. So maybe then it's like, okay, so in this specific example, it is very clear that we had a disconnect here on this project, on this thing, in this meeting. And I would love to talk to you about that. So how we can both be better and grow. And so maybe you have that kind of manager where it's all about results and you're coming to them saying, so how do we make this specific thing better? And you use that as a lifeline until you get a new job. But I do want to honor the fact that, yeah, I do think you need a new job if you can't have these hard conversations with your manager and prosper. And we are in the middle of a pandemic. And even without a pandemic, depending on the types of jobs that people do, it is sometimes hard to get a new job. And what I don't like to see is people leave their jobs and not have another solution, and then are in financial deficits, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, when we already have generational deficits. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. And then one thing, Sam, I know we have questions in the chat and we have questions in the Q&A. And are you taking them from both? I'm happy to take them from either one. We have room for one more.
Yeah. You know, this one is a bit more expansive, but it has everything to do with what Lexi B was just talking about in COVID, and the fact that most folks are working remote, or at least a large proponent are. The question from the Q&A was, any tips for applying some of this great info when we're all working remotely? And I'd just be curious, with that lens of remote work, how do you all think about some of what we've talked today about around being anti-racist, and how that might shift or how it might not?
Just to kick it off, I'm going to say I think it exacerbates the need, like, to be, now more than ever, you need to be more anti-racist. If you were tiptoeing in it, we need you to leap in face first, because now that interpersonal connection is missing. No longer are you in person reading body language. You don't have those other cues to help discomfort of only having a computer screen, and then not judging them if their mama or their pop-pop walks in the back, or if they have children, or if their space doesn't look the way you think it should look, or if their Wi-Fi is shaky because they live in the neighborhood that doesn't have that moment where you're agitated, where you have made a plethora of assumptions of how they should have showed up and should have been ready. That's the moment of pause. Because what you may not know is the grandmother they have in the back room that they're taking care of, and they're sitting in a closet. What you may not know is that they depended on their office space for peace and clarity, and now they don't have it at all, and they can't take medication because of whatever. What you don't know is that backstory. And what we are seeking is the compassion and that empathy. When you can read somebody's body language, when you can see them in the room, when you watch them get cut off, you might not want to do it on the screen, but you can chat a message. There's so many ways to be present, but you most definitely have to lean in, and you have to do it now.
So one of the challenges that I think in this time with COVID is, given how much face-to-face interaction is only happening via Zoom, I'm seeing this huge, maybe over focus on interpersonal interactions as the sole metric of anti-racist work. And I think that's dangerous, because, you know, just because I didn't say a slur this week on my Zoom call doesn't mean that my performance reviews, you know, are good. Just because I didn't say something awful about my coworkers' terrible Wi-Fi, right, doesn't mean that promotion practices are equitable at my company. And so I think COVID is masking systemic issues that maybe we could see a little bit when we were all in the workplace, but we definitely cannot see now. And that, I think, is going to ultimately be one of the biggest challenges of doing this work. Can we move beyond an interpersonal, individualist solution that involves just making sure we say the right words and saying the right things and playing nice with each other, to a solution that says, even though we can't see it anymore, let's make our organization equitable in all of the ways that matter. Even if we can't hold it, even if we can't, you know, physically interact with a document or something, we still have to do this work. And, you know, given that I don't see things ending anytime soon, like, this is going to be one of the biggest hurdles of D&I work as we continue to live through a pandemic, right? How do we do systemic work when everything's upside down and all we can see are a sea of faces, right? And I don't have an answer to that. Like, that's something that I think we need to figure out together.
The only thing I add to that, Lily, and say is, I think COVID is doing both. It is unmasking some systemic racism and then overshadowing some other areas of racism. I say that because I think the priorities have shifted. What was once like an everyday problem, like I mentioned interpersonal ability because it's one of the core tools we use to explain diversity, equity, inclusion, well, that's gone now. So now we're looking at an entirely new arena of things, and then other things we ignored have become exacerbated. So I think both are happening. Some things are being highlighted in ways they never were before, and now things that were still important are being brushed under the rug, and we got to bring those back too and do both at the same time.
And I think it'd be wonderful if everyone on this call just took the time to research Lily and Karen and Jared and Dominique, and you just hired us to come to your organizations and have these continued conversations, because
And
we don't
Lexi
really
B.
have the answers.
And like to be
We
absolutely.
don't really have the
Forget
answers
yourself.
all the way, but I think that a lot of these questions, it's about this continued
Yes.
reminding of your team and of you and of your manager of saying like, this ain't it, sis. And so how do we be better? Just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
One of my,
Karen.
I'm sorry. One of the organizations, one client organization, the CEO picked up the phone and called each 150 of the employees just to check in on them and see what do they specifically need? What can I support you with? Because some employees may need a stronger internet connection, or someone else is struggling with some other thing. So not having a blanket approach, and I know that's not scalable at companies that have gazillions of employees, but just to have the manager call them and not just do it once, but to do it continuously. I know for me, I am a very resilient, I pride myself on my mental health, but particularly the last 2 weeks of July, and just kind of realizing, that this is going to last for a very long time. And the level, the way that the deaths are mounting, et cetera, and there's no plan to rein it in, it has taken a huge impact on my mental health. And I think we need to ratchet down the expectations of what people are able to produce. The school is about to start. It's going to be all online here in San Francisco, thank goodness. But there's so much stuff going on, and we really need to understand what is going on in each individual's life and what we can do to support them.
Thank you so much, Karen. Jared, really quickly before I give it over to Sam.
Yep, I was just going to say, kind of following on Lily's and some of others have people are on a continuum with this work, right? And I think COVID has, in a way, shown where people are and exacerbate's not the right word, but highlighted or kind of, pulled up or down. So people that maybe are kind of a little more naturally empathetic and a little more naturally curious, a little more naturally compassionate, but maybe in limited scope, I think those are the people that we all in our individual and collective relationships can call in and pull into this work, because they're starting to see that they were already on that path and now they just need to step it up a little bit. Whereas to Lily's point earlier, I think some people who maybe were more on this side, they're kind of digging into that side. Not saying forget about them, but kind of forget about them for now and focus on the people who are leaning in and get a mass movement.
Absolutely. And on that note, we are the people who are leaning in. We are doing this for one another. The four of us, all of us have day jobs, and we make this a priority in addition to our day job, not only because of our passion and our commitment, but because of our need to be on this mission. It's not an option. So there are still more than 300 of you on this call, and so this is a call to action for you all to join us, because we cannot do it alone, and quite frankly, we should not. And on what I'm going to say to you is, what is your one commitment this week in light of this conversation? We've given you practical tips that some of your companies should be paying for, that a consultant will come in, and we provided a wealth of things you can do. I want you to take away from this what your commitment will be, what action you will actually do, and hold yourself accountable and bring folks along with you. My commitment as a moderator is to continue to curate discussions like this and to usher you through it with the amazing panelists like those that we have here, and support with organizations like OWN to make sure you get the right tools at the right time. And I'm going to pass it over to Sam. Sam, I'm going to stop sharing. And again, feel free to bring us home and to close us out for today. And really, I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating, for being present, and that this is not the end. This is a continuum, as Jared said. So Sam, thank you again, and take it away.
Of course. Thanks, Tom, and thanks to all of our panel. Just extraordinary conversation, so tangible, so actionable. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to all those who participated, just amazing chats and questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of it. We may have a part 3 to this if everyone agrees. So hope to have you all back. And please do reach out to these folks. And if you're looking for a platform for your organization, or you are looking for access to so much more of this type of content, I urge you to try out Hone's 30-day free trial. Come check it out. Join our conversation. It's a masterclass next week on effective allyship in the workplace. Should be a really powerful conversation. Whole workshop focused on the dangers of a culture of conformity, building high trust, addressing microaggressions in your team, both taught by Dominique. So please do go to honehq.com, sign up for that 30-day free trial. Really want to make sure that we democratize access, give all of you and folks who really need it access to this really important content during this time. So check that out, and really appreciate you joining the conversation. We will record this and share it back with all of you so that you can share it with colleagues if you think it would be helpful. But thanks again for joining the conversation, and just feel quite blessed to be a part of this, and hope to see all of you again sometime soon. Take care, y'all. Stay safe.